the icon. There we go. All right. So welcome everybody to the San Anselmo Public Library's Author Forum. My name is Linda Kenton and I'm the town librarian. And I'm very happy that you are all here with us. In particular, our three authors and who I'd like to introduce at this point. We have Jessica Dwyer, who is the author of Mother, Mother. And I'll introduce the authors and then I'll let them say a little bit about each of their books. We have Shannon Takaoka, who has written Everything I Thought I Knew. And finally, Unnatural Resources, written by Mindy Uhrlaub. Uhrlaub, I am so sorry. And I practiced that before we started. And aside from being wonderful authors, our authors are local, which is an extra special aspect to our author panel today. And so I want to thank each of you for taking time this afternoon to be with us, to be with your community. And to talk to us about your books and about your writing and what it has been like to write, during a pandemic and have your books published during a pandemic and what that has been like. We are recording this for all the members of our audience. And if you have a question, you can type it into the chat box and we will offer a traditional question and answer session after our panel discussion with our authors. But please feel free to send us your questions in the chat and then we'll collect those and have those answered at the end. So I'd like to ask, who would like to go first? Go ahead, jump in. Anyone?
I will.
I'll start. Oh, go ahead, Jen.
Okay, I'll go since my name appears first alphabetically. So I will just talk a little bit about my book. Mother, Mother is a novel. And the kind of elevator pitch that I tell about it is from the stylish and privileged art world of San Francisco to the beautiful and often dangerous highlands of Guatemala. Two mothers, two countries, one cherished son. And so that's the story, that's the kind of summary of the novel that I've written. And I just want to say it deals with issues of identity, belonging, family, love. These are all subjects that I'm obsessed about. And because I'm in a transracial adoptive family, I have two kids who are adopted from Guatemala. So these are issues, identity, belonging, who am I? These are questions that I grapple with every day in my daily life. And I'm really interested in those questions. And I decided I had to write a novel because a novel was the only thing that was kind of big enough to handle all of those issues and kind of address them. And a novel is a way that you can talk about truth in a way that you really can't in memoir. So that's why I decided to write a novel. So that's my book.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us, by the way. We all say that. We're delighted to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I guess I'll go next since I was next in the line. My name is Shannon Takaoka, and my book is Everything I Thought I Knew. It was released in October from Candlewick Press, and it will be out in the UK from Walker UK on June 3rd. So, and it's a young adult novel, and it's about a 17-year-old girl named Chloe whose life is turned upside down by a heart transplant. And it causes her to question everything about who she is and who she wants to be. The book starts out where, previously she's an overachiever, singularly focused on getting into college and all that entails, AP classes, getting good grades. She's just on that treadmill to, the next thing. And then the heart transplant changes everything. She collapses in cross-country practice and finds out she needs a heart transplant. And then very early in the book, we fast forward to 6 months after, and everything's different. She's having a hard time re-engaging with her old life. She is more interested in partying with her new friend and doing all the things that she didn't get to do when she was busy being a straight A good girl. So all that's going on, and at the same time, she starts experiencing memories that she can't quite place or recognize as her own, and she's wondering what's going on. So that's kind of the setup for where the story goes.
Excellent. All right. And Mindy, last but not least.
Yes, at the end of the alphabet. My book is Unnatural Resources, and it was inspired by King Leopold's Ghost by Adam Hochschild. I had spent many years reading about the Democratic Republic of the Congo and how difficult it is for people there. It has a very long history of pillage by outside forces. And so a lot of the stories I was hearing, especially about modern day Congo, were tragic stories about girls being raped and tortured. And I started thinking that I had never read a book about Congo where a girl actually triumphed. So I set out to write a novel about an 11-year-old girl named Therese, whose family is taken over by a militia group, and she is raped, and her family has been kidnapped by an evil general, and she strives to find her family. And the story is ultimately one about girl power and just the force that one girl can have when she's determined to find her family. And it's sort of about hostile environments and about family and friends in the strangest environments, and what pulls people together and how it redefines family. So yeah, it's kind of hard to write about an underdog, but it sure was a lot of fun.
So I find that your three stories are so different. Again, given that you're, local authors, and sometimes people might think, oh, similar stories would spring from, the same geography. And obviously that's not true. I'm interested in hearing what inspired you to write your stories. Where did your stories come from? Shannon, I'd like to start with you.
Sure. So I love to listen to weird sciencey podcasts, and I read a lot of nonfiction and things like that. And I don't remember where I originally heard the story, but it was either a podcast or an article about organ recipients who reported that they felt like they had somehow inherited preferences or interests of their donors. Like maybe they liked a particular type of music that they didn't like before, or foods that they didn't like before. And I just thought that was fascinating thing to think about. And also, and whether it's scientifically possible or not, I just thought that it was a really interesting way to look at identity and who we are, especially when something like that has happened to you. And I especially thought that putting that into a character who was at a point in her life where she was really trying to figure out her own identity might be an interesting thing to look at. So that was kind of the spark of the idea. And then I did a lot of research on heart transplants and heart research, which is all incredibly fascinating. But I also like to kind of mash up different ideas. So as the book progressed, I started adding in some more fantastical or speculative elements that were inspired by quantum physics and ideas around parallel realities in the multiverse. So
it's really interesting. I have a good friend who's the recipient of a liver transplant, and I see a conversation in my future with her.
yeah.
You know, just if there's been any sort of, you know, situation like that for her.
It's fascinating. And, you know, there's a great book called When Death Becomes Life, Notes from a Transplant Surgeon by Joshua Mesrick. I think I heard him on NPR after I was writing the book, but he actually talked about that and about patients reporting stuff like that. So I thought it was just completely fascinating. Yeah.
And Mindy or Jessica, would you like to share your story of inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, you know, like I said, reading King Leopold's Ghost was the first thing that even illuminated the flickering light bulb over my head. I had no idea about what happened under King Leopold of Belgium. I had no idea of the history of Congo. And when my dad actually suggested that I look into Human Rights Watch, I dug a little bit deeper and I started reading their annual reports, and there were reports about, you know, kidnappings and rape and torture and pillage and all this horrible stuff that's happening now. And I guess, you know, in my sort of Marin bubble, I've been very insulated from that. And I just didn't understand that there's modern slavery there and there's modern slavery elsewhere. And I really wanted to see what people did to stay sane after stuff like that happened. How did they survive? And ultimately, I mean, I started writing the book before I ever went to the DRC, but I actually did travel there. I went with Eve Ensler's V-Day and Human Rights Watch to interview child soldiers and survivors of rape and torture. And DRC, first of all, it's a beautiful country, and you know, you hear about terrible things that happen there, but it's the beauty of the country is nothing compared to the beauty of the people. They're so strong and so resilient, and I made friends really easily there, and I'm still in touch with people. And the last time I went there was 2014, and really this book is for them. I mean, these women who have endured incredible difficulty, you know, they're surviving and they're flourishing and they have hope and they're joyful. And I really wanted for people to take something away from my book about Congo, you know, that it's not a lost cause and that there's still hope there. And I think it helps that it's a novel. You know, it puts a hopeful spin on a really horrible situation. But that was my inspiration. I still think about the people that I met there every day.
Do you still have that hope since writing the book? You know, has anything changed? Are you, you know, more hopeful or less hopeful?
Well, I mean, you know, our previous president pardoned a really offensive man who was an outsider who owned mining operations and drilling operations. And, you know, when that pardon came down, I was really pissed off, to be honest with you. You know, that said, there are some girls that I sponsored in Congo to go through law school, and they're becoming lawyers, and that's really amazing. And so it's a humble hope, I guess, is the best way of saying it.
That's wonderful. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And last but not least, Jessica, what inspired you?
Well, so I've always been interested. I mean, my daughter is now almost 19. I've been involved in Guatemala for that long. And I had this idea that I wanted to tell a story from the point of view of an indigenous Maya Ixil woman who had given birth to a son who ends up being adopted to the United States. And so I go to Guatemala every year for a month in the summer. And one year we decided to go up to the highlands of a part of the country called the Ixil area, which, as you may know, Guatemala was involved in a civil conflict, armed conflict for 36 years, which ended in 1996. And the center of it was in this northern highlands of Guatemala. And we hired a driver, which is how we get around in Guatemala. My kids and I travel with them, and to be safe, I always hire a driver. And we went to this town, which was the epicenter of the conflict. And the minute we drove into that town and I saw the square and I saw the church and I knew what had happened there and how many lives had been affected by the conflict, that the whole story just kind of came to me. And I knew that that was where it was going to begin. And that was my starting point. So just the whole thing was like, it was an amazing realization that's the story I had to tell.
Wow. That's great. I love that. That's such a unique, I think, story, in that it's like the story came to you. You found that place and there it was. That's very powerful.
It did feel that way. And even visually, it would come to me in a dream. It was as if I had almost lived this myself. It was interesting that way. And I think it's because I was so enmeshed in the country that I just thought about it so much. So yeah, it was nothing like that has ever happened to me before. And I'm hoping it happens again. That kind of inspiration, it rarely is like a lightning bolt. That doesn't usually happen.
Yeah, interesting. Well, now that you have your, we know your stories of inspiration, I find that a lot of us who aren't authors often wonder, how people who have this gift to write stories, where you write from, how you write. Do you have a schedule? Do you not have a schedule? Do you have a nook at home? Virginia Woolf, do you have a room of your own that you write from? If you don't mind sharing some aspects of that with all of us, that would be great. And I will just let you all, interject at will.
Well, I for one am missing coffee shops big time. Because and libraries. I wrote part of my book at the San Anselmo Library. My daughter had dance class down the street from the library, so I would drop her off at dance class and go to the library and work.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
And I also go to the Civic Center library. I library hop. I go to the Mill Valley one. I love libraries because I love being surrounded by books when I'm writing, and that kind of inspires me. But they're also quiet. But also, and then coffee shops when I want a little, like, I don't know, I want to get a little eavesdroppy about, like, people going by. So I am missing that a lot. This year has been hard because although I write at home too, it's nice to kind of just get out of my house and be out in the world. I think that it helps a lot. So yes, that's my writing spot used to be everywhere. And now it's a little more confined until we're through this pandemic.
And for me, I was part of a writing community before COVID hit. And, a lot of the places where the writing community would meet are places where I would work. So we would, meet at Book Passage, and then I'd find myself writing at Book Passage, where I could also be surrounded not only by coffee, but also by books, not necessarily in that order, but so bookstores that have cafes are always good. But really, one of the most helpful places for me to write was actually in the fire station in Sausalito. They had like a NaNoWriMo meeting, and right next to the firehouse, and a bunch of NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writers Month, writers would come, and we would all sit down for a couple hours and just write. And that's fantastic, is to be around other writers and just sort of parallel play with them. I love that. Those were the days.
Yeah. I love your image of parallel play. Takes us all back to when our kids were toddlers.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it kind of feels like it now because kids were home for so
Right.
long this last year,
Yeah.
no matter how old they were, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I want to add too, I'm also a big library writer. I love the library, and I write at different libraries throughout Marin. And I also write at home. Most of the time I write at home. But I will say for other people who are writers, and one thing that is really helpful for me is to go away for at least a week. And because something really, really intense happens when you just block out the whole world. So I'm very lucky. I had a place I could go to that my family had, and I could just go there by myself. And it's a way of tapping into my self-conscious, one's self-conscious, that I think you can only do, at least for me, in complete isolation. And there's something so dreamlike about it, and psychologically, I don't know, just deep, that I find that has been really, really helpful for me. And I've probably written the largest chunks of my book when I was away from people, you know. And then the other way I think about it is I wouldn't have to come out of the dream. You know, like when I'm at home, as soon as, you know, my kids have come home, the dog needs to be walked, the laundry needs, you know, blah, blah, blah. I'm going in and out of the dream over and over and over again. But when I can get myself away, that is just the most helpful thing. And I remember when I first started writing, we were at Writing Mamas, a meeting that we were at, a book passage. We were all part of this group. And I remember Ayelet Waldman came, and she is a writer who lives in the East Bay, very well known. And she said this, that you need to go away. And I remember thinking, that's impossible. I can never go away. How is that going to work? You know? And then after a few years, I finally just put the stake in the sand and I said, I got to get out of here. I have to go somewhere. You know, I can't, I just need to have some time. So to anyone out there who's listening, I would say, take that time and try to make it work, because there's something that really happens that's different when you're away from all the other cues from the rest of your life.
Yeah, that makes a difference for sure. But like the other thing that I would say that I had to learn, especially this year, is sometimes I get very wrapped up in the fact that, oh, I need this 2-hour block to write. And, you know, I have 2 kids. I had to like sometimes throw that out, especially this last year when everybody's home, and say, you know what, I'm dropping someone off somewhere and I have 15 minutes. My laptop is in the car. I open it up and work. Because I mean, the other part of this book I wrote was before the pandemic, because the book was sold before the pandemic, but was waiting for my kids at sports practices. I would just bring my laptop with me whenever I had 15. I had to like really just say, it doesn't have to be perfect, that as long as I have 15 minutes, I can, you know, write a paragraph. You know, it's not ideal. And this year it's been, when I'm in my home office, I'll put like a sign outside the door, like busy. And my like son he's 12, he'll open up the door and he'll be like, I'm like, busy. And he's like, oh, you mean right now? You mean right now? I'm like, yeah, that's what that sign meant. But anyhow, it's funny, but.
Well, both Jessica and Shannon have touched on another question that I have, which is, you know, what is your actual process? You know, so we've got sort of your place set up, but, you know, do you pre-write? Do you, you know, a couple of you have mentioned, you know, taking chunks of time. But beyond that, like, you know, is the whole story in your head, or does it evolve as you write? And even, do you use a computer? It sounds like, you know, Shannon does, or do you write on paper? You know, sort of those interesting, almost nuts and bolts pieces of your writing process, if you could speak to that.
I'm a notebook and pen gal. And I'm definitely not an organized writer. I don't work with step outlines. I don't work with, I mean, sometimes I'll write a character bio, but I will never know exactly where the mind is going. I just sit there and look at the white page, and to me, that's just very exciting. You know, right now I'm very happy. My son bought me My Neighbor Totoro. It's like a furry little notebook, and so it's just great. I can actually like pick up my notebook and like snuggle it and like pet it and stuff, and then I start writing it, and yeah, it's just a crazy writer thing. But you know, that's the kind of thing we do to summon the muse or whatever.
Yeah.
I wish I was better about writing in a notebook because, you know, when you're on your laptop, I'm faster on there, but it's distracting, right? You're getting emails. I do have the software that like locks me out of the internet. It's called Freedom for anybody who's writing, and that definitely helps. When I don't have an outline situation either, I do some pre-writing to try and figure out what the heck my idea is about. And once I kind of get an idea of where I'm going, I start to think about, well, where is this going to end? And it wasn't until I figured out the end of my book that I was able to really get the middle done. So for me, it's almost like trying to figure out a puzzle. You know, I had these key scenes in my mind that I really like thought about, and I thought, okay, this is where the story's going. And then I wrote out of order and then stitched it together after I knew kind of what were the key moments were going to be. But I want to try and get better about outlining because I think that helps you write faster, frankly, but because I'm kind of a slowpoke.
I'm different from you two. I'm an outliner, definitely. I definitely knew where the story started and where it was ending. Like I saw the last scene, I knew the whole thing. But you know, that said, I veered from the outline, but I had to have the outline. And I think it was because I had written a memoir first. And, you know, I learned the hard way that I went down all kinds of alleys that I didn't need to go down and that I wasted so much time. And so this book took many years to write still because of all the distractions I had. I mean, Shannon, I just want to say, I'm with you too, also writing in 15-minute chunks, but ideally, I'm just saying, you know, a week away is the goal. But anyway, so I'm an outliner, unlike the other two writers here. I had an outline, but I would veer from the outline. So some minor characters just revealed themselves to me one day, just literally showed up, and I had to finesse the outline to let them come in the side door. But otherwise, I'm definitely an outliner.
It's interesting because it really sounds like there's no right or wrong way, right? And sometimes that message kind of comes across, like attending a seminar on how to become a writer or, something. And so it's really nice to hear that you can be very flexible. You can move in and out of even your own general writing style and do something else, all in service of the story that you're trying to tell. And so I think that's very hopeful, especially if, we've got some aspiring writers that are tuning in and watching today. We've talked about your inspiration, how you do it. One of the things that is almost a black box to those of us that work in libraries is the publishing process, right? Because we read all the reviews, librarians read all the reviews, and then we make our purchases based on the reviews and, budget, of course. And so all these wonderful, books come across, in front of us and become part of our collections. But the piece about, well, how do you get published, and how does that work? And in particular, this past year, during the pandemic, what was that like? Getting your book published and the process. So, if anyone would like to, start with that, I'm all ears.
I'll start because I think I came to my publisher in an unconventional way. I actually queried my publisher directly. I didn't have an agent. I still don't have an agent. And I worked directly with my publisher, and my book was not actually purchased during the pandemic. They showed interest in February of last year, and they didn't send me a contract until May. So they didn't even own it until May. As far as the pandemic is concerned, I mean, I was determined to launch my book live. And so I had a socially distant launch party. And so that was in October, and it was an outdoor party, and it was fabulous, actually. Everybody was sitting 6 feet apart, and it was tons of fun. I don't have a big publisher. My publisher is a very small publisher. In fact, I do think that I might be their last book. They've been in business since 1978. They were a ma and pa operation, and unfortunately, the pa of the operation just passed away. So I don't know what the next step for my book is, but so far, I feel like we make this book launch thing during a pandemic work, right? I mean, this is the way we do it. And, I was kind of complaining about the fact that it's really sad that we can't actually be in person and like hug each other and like sign books and do all the things that we do at a book launch. But really, I mean, what are the chances that a lot of people are going to come to a bookstore to see you speak? I mean, maybe the chances are better that they'd come to a Zoom. I mean, if we have 15 people today or 17 people today, it's like, well, how many people would have come to a book launch? I don't know. Like, one never knows. But I'm not complaining. I'm just happy that my book is out.
I would say the one thing that was interesting about this is my debut novel, and publishing in my day job life, I do business writing for tech companies where everything is very fast, and publishing is so glacially slow. Like I went through an agent, and I sold my book in 2018, and my book came out in October 2020. And that is a typical publishing cycle. Like, books are in development for a really long time. So there are these spaces of like, you're waiting a lot. and I think that if you're an author, the most important thing to remember is to work on something else while you're waiting, because you're going to spend a lot of time like waiting for an email from someone, waiting to hear about a date, waiting to hear when you can announce something. So patience is just a big part of it, a big part of it. And I'm fundamentally a little impatient, so that took some getting used to. But in terms of it coming out during the pandemic, well, that was wild. My book came out not just during the pandemic, but 2 weeks before the most contentious presidential election in history. And then everything shut down right around Thanksgiving again. And I had events lined up prior to, like, I was supposed to go to BookCon and a couple other things. So everybody was pivoting, and that was a little bit overwhelming, I think, because everybody was pivoting to online. Though I will say that in some ways, like, I got to do some events with bookstores that I wouldn't have done live because I would have had to travel and it would have been a big thing. And so it did give me the opportunity to reach readers I might not have been able to reach in person. But at the same time, I think the hardest part about it, especially for a debut author who doesn't have like name recognition yet, is there wasn't bookstore traffic. Because around the holidays, especially right after when my book came out, there's not people like walking through, and I love this cover, and I was like, want people to see it, and they had to like search for it. So that, I think that was really hard. And it'll be interesting to see what goes back to, when things get back to normal, how things are going to be. But yeah, it's been really interesting.
I have nothing to add. Ditto to everything they both said.
Oh, excellent. I just wanted to say that, what we're finding with our virtual programs is they have a very different shelf life, for lack of a better word. So we've got all the folks who are here today, but because you've all been very gracious to agree to our recording of this, it will be posted on our website on our YouTube channel, and you can just watch the views continue after the event is over. So our virtual programs actually have a whole new set of legs that is impossible before, when everyone would just convene together and then it's over. So that's kind of nice, and hopeful also for how we potentially may do things in the future and continue to do things. So I love your answers, and it's so interesting to think about how slow the process is, because by the time librarians see the reviews, I really didn't know that a book could have been in the works for several years. We kind of know that about nonfiction, but in general, even fiction falling into that category is really sort of interesting and unexpected. Related to that, so what advice would you have to new authors, given your experience so far?
I would say my main advice, or two things, is one, find good teachers. I feel like I really benefited from all the teachers I've had. I've gone to workshops, conferences. I got my MFA a couple of years ago. And I just felt like I had really good teachers and mentors who taught me, from whom I learned a lot. And then the second thing is just do not give up. I think that's really the key, is persistence, and just keep slogging away. It feels like something that is impossible, and in many ways it is, but you just have to keep moving forward. So that's what I would say. Just don't give up.
Anyone want to add anything to that? That seems very
Not really. I think she said it perfectly. I mean, I could whip up my query tracker and knock your socks off, but it's just, there's no reason to. It's like, I could query 200 agents and never have interest in the Congo, but the second I queried a publisher, they bought it. So it's kind of like, you just never know where you're going to find support. And so part of it is also being gracious about getting the support that you have, because you're not going to get it where you think you're going to get it. You got to be gracious about your local librarian who decides to have you on.
Yeah, I have like a couple specific things. First, I think most people know this, but if you're gonna write, you have to read a ton. And every genre, like nonfiction, fiction, poetry, great journalism. I spent one day, I think, when I was working on the beginning of my book, just reading opening chapters to see what worked and what hooked me. Because, and I even other content like film, I will watch with an eye to like, why is this story arc the way it is? And I just learned a lot from the way other people tell stories. And I think that is really inspiring, but I also I think I learned the most from reading, even though like writing advice is great. And there are lots of great craft books too, for sure. But just reading great work, by good authors just really makes a big difference. And then this one was a key one for me, is finish, because it is very easy to get excited about an idea. And then you're like, and then you get 20% in there and you're like, oh, what's happening now? What's going to happen in the middle? I stink. I like, whatever. I'm going to put this in a drawer because there's another shiny new idea that's like, no, maybe I'll do this. And you have to finish, because then you can edit and revise, because good writing, successful writing is 90% revision, 10% writing that first draft. So I think try to commit to finishing things, so then you can see what you can do with it, because you don't really know what you can do with it if you don't finish it. And to sell a work of fiction, for sure, you have to be done to get an agent, or for your agent to sub it to editors. You can't sell a book on a proposal. I think in nonfiction you can, but not in fiction. So you got to have it done to get out there. So
This sounds like excellent advice from all of you. Thank you. And when you talk about reading and the importance of reading to write, would any of you like to share a favorite author or a favorite book? I know it's so hard.
So many books, so little time.
Yeah, talk about being put on the spot, right? You know, maybe there's someone that you turn to, or that just a book that you've loved for many years that you go back to or not go back to.
I will tell you one of my favorite childhood books was A Wrinkle in Time by Madeline L'Engle. I like Neil Gaiman a lot because I just feel like he's able to do all these different genres from kids to adults. And I like a little weird in my stories, so I like that he incorporates. So I love The Graveyard Book, which
Yes.
is like a middle grade book. It's so good. And The Ocean at the End of the Lane, which is for adults. Love it. I just what did I read this year in literary fiction that I went? The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett was so good. So I mean, I have like tons of YA author friends too, and I feel like if I start talking about those, I'll never stop talking about those books, and then I'll miss somebody and I'll feel bad. But there are so many great YA books out right now, and I encourage everybody to look at books from 2020 authors in YA fiction and literary fiction, because we all had a really bad year trying to get our work out there in the pandemic. So definitely check out books that came out in 2020 and 2021, because I think they're still up against the same challenge.
It does seem like a lot of the same challenges are following us into 2021 so far.
Who are your favorite authors, Jessica?
Well, you know, it's interesting because when you were talking before about the library and you were talking about reading widely, one thing I really, really missed during the pandemic is what I used to do was I would go to the Tiburon Library, which is my local library, and I would literally stand there in the first section. They have all the new books, and I would just read the first pages of every new book. I have read the first pages of so many books. And the first chapters, and you know, just to sort of admire the craft and see how they do it. And so that's something that has really taught me a lot. Thank you for that reminder, Shannon. And it's funny because like right now I'm reading Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck, which I've never read. And I'm enjoying it so much. I mean, I think because I'm just imagining going on a road trip, and just the way he writes about Charlie, the dog, is so gorgeous. And I find that I'm underlining so many descriptions that he has just of America and places that he's been. And so, you know, it's these kind of things like, and of course, my favorite, the book that changed my life was Of Mice and Men, also by John Steinbeck when I was a young person. But when I was writing this book, interestingly, for some reason, I had read Jane Smiley and The Age of Grief. It's a collection of short stories. And I think that's a novella. I literally would have that on my desk and just read it over and over again. And I think it was because I so admired the way she portrayed children. And one of the characters in my book, Juan, who changes his name to Jack when he moves to the United States because nobody can say his name correctly, and he wants to try to fit in a little bit more. He's a young boy who we meet when he's 5. And I felt like Jane Smiley did that so well. So I tend to sort of revisit authors who I've known and loved for a long time. Alice McDermott is another one. That Night. It's a novel that she, you know, came out years ago, and that I love. I still love. So I mean, I read a lot of different kinds of things, but those are things that have affected me, I think.
And I always like books about children who are in peril. In particular, A High Wind in Jamaica. That's a very old book, written by Richard Hughes, I believe is the name of the author. I absolutely adore that book, and I really like The Heart is a Lonely Hunter by Carson McCullers as well. Also old books, but you know, it's kind of nice to discover those old books. They knew what they were doing back then, huh? So
very true. Yeah. I'm partial to dystopian fiction myself, so I
Oh.
always enjoy reading those for some reason, and they've been great in this last year.
Station
Mhm.
11 is one of my favorites.
Yes,
That's
yes,
so
that's a
good.
fantastic book. Yeah, yeah. I would enjoy, if you are willing, to read an excerpt from each of your books. I think our audience would probably really enjoy that as well, you know, to sort of round out our time together. And maybe the very last thing after that would be to talk about, you know, any upcoming projects you have or what you're working on now. And then we'll open it up to a Q&A with our audience. So if you would like, I invite you to share an excerpt from your book.
Okay,
You wanna go, Paul?
should I go first? I'll be brief. This is my book, by the way, Mother. I'll just set it up quickly. This is Juan is now been put in a state-run orphanage. He's been living in foster care. He's in Guatemala, and his mother, Julie Cowan, who is an art museum curator in San Francisco, goes down to Guatemala to visit him. So I'll just read a brief excerpt. I hope it's okay that I went first, ladies. But anyway, okay, so here we go. Let's see. They passed through blocks of cement row houses with roll down aluminum doors and streets full of dusty cars and packs of roaming dogs. They were deep in the Guatemala they saw on the news, but had never experienced in the Marriott neighborhood. Almost there, the driver, Carlos, said. A few blocks later, he yanked the steering wheel to the left and pulled up to a driveway in front of a cement wall with a massive steel door. Leaping out of the driver's seat with the engine running, he spoke into a keypad and the gate creaked open. A guard in an orange vest waved them in, and Julie turned to see the gate creak shut and the orange vested man secure it with a steel bar. A two-story concrete building stood at the end of a dirt driveway. Every window was barred. Although the orphanage housed 60 children, there was no physical evidence of children. No scattered toys, no bicycles laid on their sides waiting for a girl or boy to jump on and pedal. Aside from the dirt itself, the dirt courtyard was spotless. Along the edge of the driveway, 10 to 15 teenage boys and girls sat on a low wall, leaning into each other and chatting, tossing pebbles at the ground, or simply staring at Julie as the car drove by. They were waiting for family to visit, Carlos explained with a gruff snicker. Except family never did visit. Not once had Carlos ever seen a relative visit the orphanage. Okay, I'll stop there.
Thank you for that.
Go ahead, Shannon, you're next in the alphabet.
I think Shannon's muted. Somehow.
Oh, I'm back. Okay.
Okay.
Wouldn't let me unmute for him. Okay, I'll just do maybe a quick, let's see. I don't want to go on to, okay, I'm just going to do the first page. It's just the intro. Okay, from chapter 1. Here's one of the many things I thought I knew that turns out to be wrong. You need to fall in love to end up with a broken heart. That's not how it was for me, at least not at first. Sometimes things, glass, eggs, hearts, just break, and there's no way to put them back to their exact original form. You can't stir the cream out of your coffee. A broken plate, even if you glue it, will always have cracks. This is just basic physics, or more specifically, the second law of thermodynamics, not to nerd out on you too much. But I'm already getting ahead of myself, which I tend to do because my brain never seems to want to slow down and just be still. There's too much going on in there, especially now. So let's rewind a bit and begin with the moment the universe decided to start messing with all my assumptions and well-laid plans, big time. October 14th at 3:45 p.m. It's the fall of my senior year. I'm running. So short and sweet.
Yeah, nice. Thank you for that as well.
Sure. Okay.
So I'm going to try and shorten my little excerpt to just a tiny little bit. Well, hope I don't go too far into this. This is when Therese is reunited with her brother, who she's been looking for months. Therese sat on his bedside and kissed his bony cheeks. She bent over his small form and pressed her chest to his. He did not hug back, but she could not seem to pull herself from him. She wrapped her arms around his skinny body and inhaled. Even though he smelled of hospital soap, she recognized him. She started to babble a stream of, "I love you, my brother, my brother." Therese felt his heart thump against hers. She breathed him in through her nose and out through her mouth. She felt him shift beneath her weight, like she was hurting him, and she lifted up a bit. His ribs poked into hers, and his tummy felt as though it had a soccer ball inside of it. Dr. Bingy said, "Stay as long as you want." She looked closely at Felix. His hair was gone. There was a rash on his head from where he had scratched the lice. Scabs stuck up from his scalp like tiny islands. The whites of his eyes had rivers of red passing through them, as if he had not slept for a long, long time. He sighed and his eyes got heavy. Therese watched the pulse bump up and down in his neck. She put her hand on the soft, clean gown on his chest. Her baby brother was alive. She had a family again.
Wow. And you didn't hold up your book, but here it is.
Sorry, it's I was remiss. Here it is.
Yes, thank you for that. Wow. I very much enjoyed hearing those excerpts out loud and hearing them from your voices. There's something always really powerful to hear the words coming from the author. I would love to hear what you are working on now, upcoming projects that you may have.
Sure, I'm working on another young adult novel. It is set in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. And it's about a girl who, a quiet girl whose daydreams offer her a portal into other realities. So I'm going to play around with alternate realities again on this one. Yeah.
Sounds great. Jessica or Mindy?
Go ahead, Jessica.
I wish I had something really interesting to say, but I don't. You know, I have to say that writing this novel just kind of depleted something in me as far as my ideas. I felt like I have said everything I want to say on that subject. And now I need to think of a new subject. And I will eventually, but I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. So I'm kind of recharging by reading and thinking. So hopefully soon something will come to me. How about you, Mindy?
Yeah, well, if I could just interject, thank you for your honesty about that. You know, because I think that's invaluable as well to hear. You don't always have to have, you know, something going. Sometimes you need to recharge and think and take that time to read, which has been a theme throughout our conversation. So thank you. And Mindy, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
I'm working on a memoir right now. And so, yeah, so it's sort of a cheery little book. And I completed my first draft during NaNoWriMo 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago. So I'm pulling that one out of the drawer and dusting it off.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'd like to open it up for questions from our audience. And Siriana, do you have any questions from our audience in chat, or would someone like to raise their hand and share, ask a question?
Hi, it's me, Sariana. There is a question in the chat from Adrian. How many versions / drafts did each of you write?
That's such a good question. I literally probably rewrote my book 5 times. And I mean rewrote, slashed it, took out tens of thousands of words. The beginning was no longer the beginning. The beginning now was not the beginning then. There was so much revision. Even though I had an outline, the outline, as I said, kept changing. But it's amazing how much goes into the editing process. It is just staggering. And that's why what Shannon says about getting the first draft out is so important, because then that's when the really hard work starts. You think writing the first draft is really the hard work, and it is, but the even more difficult and challenging work in some ways is revising. So I literally had several rewrites and then tens of thousands of edits. So many.
Yeah, I would say multiple drafts, just multiple drafts. I mean, because, before I got an agent, I went through multiple drafts. When I got an agent, she had feedback and I went through multiple drafts. When I sold it to Candlewick, my editor there and I worked on multiple drafts. So there's a lot of revision happening. It's a much better book for it. So you have to have a thick skin about that. And, but I think that I love revision because I find first drafts really hard. I like staring at a blank page is much harder for me than making what I already have better. But I think my book, when I first wrote it, it was like 50,000 words and it ended up being like 70,000 words. So, and then that is like, I added 20,000 words, but I think I subtracted 20,000 words. So probably added 40,000 words. So I almost wrote like a whole other book in the process. Yeah.
And I had 13 entire drafts before my book was picked up by my publisher. And then I had to rewrite like 2 or 3 more times. So that was a whole bunch of rewrites.
Yeah, I always think, I always say it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
And you just have to put your shoulder to the wheel and stay with it. And it just keeps getting better and better and better. And it's so exciting because you think it's good and you think it's finished. And then you realize, no, it's not good. It's not finished. And then it just keeps getting better and better and tighter and stronger. And then when you're finally done, it's just a thrill because you've taken it as far as you can. But you just keep pushing until you get there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Marianne, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question.
Hi, ladies. It's good to see you.
Hi, Marianne.
Good to see you.
I'm not quite together, but this was a great panel. I thought the conversation just flowed great. I'm delighted I made it. I was wondering if you had any surprising or unexpected reaction from readers. And I was particularly thinking about Jessica and Mindy, because you've got some topics that can be a little controversial. And you're writing some characters from, ethnicities that you are not, which can also get tricky. So I was just curious about reader reaction.
Actually, I mean, I've only had support from readers at this point. The only time anybody read anything, well, I mean, I guess I should say that one time I had somebody read the first couple pages of my book and then refused to review it for me because he has a daughter. And it was just really, really painful for him to read some of the first opening pages of my book because they're brutally violent. He was the only person I knew who couldn't stick with it. But otherwise, I would say I've never had anybody take offense to anything that I wrote in that book. And if they did take offense to it, they've been really quiet about it.
Yeah, I had to, like Mindy, I'm writing about a culture that's outside my own, although I have 2 kids from Guatemala, so I consider my family as part Guatemalan now. We're in reunion with both their birth families and they're part of our family. And Guatemala is certainly part of our life. So you really, when you're writing outside your own skin, just in general for all of us, you really have to approach it with respect and humility and a kind of willingness to learn. And so one of the things I did was have two people from Guatemala, well, one person from Guatemala and one person from El Salvador read the book before, when it was still in manuscript form. And I had them read it and I had their feedback, and my friend from Guatemala made some really very, very subtle suggestions that were really helpful. So I think it's important to have readers who are within the culture about what you're writing weigh in on it. And then the other population that I write about is the adoptee and the birth mother culture, because I'm not either of those things, even though I'm an adoptive mother and I know a lot about adoption, but I don't know exactly that. But the response, especially from the community of people who are adopted from Guatemala, has been so positive. And more that they're just so thrilled to have that story told, because maybe they're not in a position to tell that story. And that was one of the things that I felt, that I was in a position to tell this story because I'm able to write a book, and I know how to write a book. So I'm very grateful that I can do that. And I think, and so the response has been very positive. And I'm really gratified by that. There's nothing that makes me happier. In fact, there's a website called Adoptees with Guatemalan Roots, and they reviewed my book and they gave it a really positive review. And I read it to my kids, and my daughter said, well, I would listen to that review more than I would listen to a review in the New York Times. Now,
Smart kid.
of course, who wouldn't love to be reviewed in the New York Times? But for my daughter, who's Guatemalan, hearing from another man, a man who is Guatemalan also, that meant a lot to her. Like, that meant, okay, seal of approval. So thank you for asking that question. It's an important question, because we have to, the way we approach other people outside of our own skin, and also the response. Mm-hmm.
If you have a question, feel free to either type it into the chat or unmute yourself and ask it. And I don't see any other. Oh, Jacqueline, hi, welcome.
Hi, great panel, you guys. Hey, Mindy. So my question's on the sort of the publishing side, and it's once you've published and now you've learned, like, this is what it takes, this is how they think, this is would that have changed if you'd had that knowledge before you started? Like, how much did the process of my idea becoming a product change how you would initiate the creation of this product?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a great question. I feel like as a debut author, there's so much I didn't know or understand about this business. There's a lot to learn about it. And there's always, like, I mean, just this year alone, there's a lot of consolidation happening, especially among the big, what they call the big 5 publishers. Now I think it's down to 4. There's always a lot of, like, things happening behind the scenes that I think the thing that I learned is there's so much. All I can control is what I write, and the marketing, the sales, reviews, all those things. I don't have a lot of control over that. It's my publisher, that's their job, and it just all depends on different books get different budgets and all those kinds of things. And, like, this pandemic is proof that, like, we don't have control over anything. All I can control is making my product the best that it can be. And I had to, like, let go of some of that other stuff, because I think a lot of authors go into this feeling like, because it's true that the industry does rely on us to do a lot of our own publicity, and we do that, but, like, you're one person and there's only so much you can do. And I just had to let go of trying to feel like I could control some of that, because it will drive you a bit nuts. So I just really try to focus on the next thing. And I would say to that, I think I would refer back to what I said earlier too, because it's such a slow cyclical business, always be working on the next thing. Because, some authors, like, will have 2 books that sell, like, a little bit, and then their 3rd book you know, hits it big and you just don't know. So just, I think it's just always about like, keep working on the next thing too.
Yeah, that's well said. I mean, I wrote what could be, I mean, it could be argued that it's a very unpalatable book when it comes to the industry. And I just happened to find a publisher who loved humanitarian stories. And, you know, basically I told myself that if an agent or a publisher wanted me to rewrite before they handed me a contract, I was not going to do it. And because I needed to write my truth, and I was not gonna just change something because someone wanted me to change it. They actually had to like show me that they believed in me, you know, not show me the money because it's never about money, but you know, like give me a contract first and then ask me to change it. Don't ask me to change it for you and then blow me off. Because this, I've been kind of messed up by agents who have asked me to change something, and I sort of bend over backwards for them, and then I rewrite it and they're like, yeah, just kidding, I wasn't interested, you know. And for me, that's really, I mean, writers are thin-skinned. I think we are. I think we're sensitive, you know, and it sucks when someone says, I'm really interested. I mean, could you imagine like if you were going on a first date and someone was like, hey, I like you, but if you were like 6 feet tall with blonde hair, I'd be so much, could you just be like 6 feet tall and like blonde? I would really like that. And so you go to like the stretching machine and you like stretch, you know, 6 more inches and lose like 10 pounds and dye your hair. And you're like, what do you think of me now? And then all of a sudden, you know, they're like, just kidding, I liked you better the way you were before, you know? I mean, take me like I am now, take my book the way it is now, and I'm not going to do anything until you send me a contract.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with you, Mindy, about speaking your own truth. You know, you just have to do that. But I will say this: if I ever write another book, it will be my 3rd book, and I know this is heresy to say, but I might look more to the market in my 3rd book. My first 2 books, I did not. I was so compelled to write these stories that it really did. I knew that these books needed to exist in the world because they just needed to. But for my 3rd book, whatever that is, I might think a little bit more about how could I make this a little bit more marketable to a wider audience. So I don't know if I'll succeed at that, but I'm gonna try that. I will try that. My first 2 books, I didn't think about that at all. And I have to say, sometimes when I think, has anyone even read my book? And then I think, but what's important is that I wrote it. And I think that's how all writers feel. Like you just feel like you did this and it needed to be done and the story is in the world. And that's an important thing. That's a really wonderful thing. And so good for us, you know, great. So yeah.
Well, I've read your book.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, making, you know, books available in libraries also, you know, they have a life in libraries and people sometimes stumble across things that they wouldn't have stumbled across before. And, you know, we always hope to have books for people that need them at that right time. And that's a really, I think, precious place for stories, you know, because the right person's going to find that book at the time that they need it. And that's a wonderful connection. And so,
Yeah.
you know, I thank you for that, for writing those stories that aren't being written otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And any other questions? I don't see anyone stepping forward in the chat or live. So I think I will take this time to thank each of you, Jessica, Mindy, Shannon. Thank you for being so open, so honest in this conversation. It's been very informative, very interesting. I hope our audience has enjoyed your time with us and your insights as much as I have. I've very much enjoyed meeting you and speaking with you, so thank you. And we will have this recording on our website with links to your web pages, check out the books, purchase them through our authors. If you're not able to make a purchase, you can check them out from the library as well, and enjoy these books and their stories. So again, I thank you, and I wish you the best in your future endeavors. And thank you
Thanks for having us.
Yes,
Thank
thanks for having
you.
us.
Yeah, thank you so much.